Masoretic text. Most of our time is going to be dealing with the New Testament. And so as we begin to look at what was taking place, we find that the New Testament was divided primarily into three different text types. The first of these were the Western, and then the Alexandrian, and the traditional text. Now, the Western texts were comprised of those documents and writings of the Western Church Fathers, and contained the writings of people like the Diatessaron of Tatian, or the Old Latin Version, or the various types of that from the Western Church at that time. It also included the Codex Beza and these types. The second was the Alexandrian text, and the Alexandrian texts are those manuscripts that were handled by Origen and other church fathers living in Alexandria and Egypt. And the most famous of these Alexandrian texts are the Vaticanus and the Sinaiticus. And the impurity of those two manuscripts is phenomenal. It's not a matter of opinion, but of fact. If anyone looks at these, that they are the most untrustworthy documents in the world today. One authority has calculated, my friends, that the Vaticanus leaves out words or whole phrases no less than 330 times in Matthew, 365 times in Mark, 439 times in Luke, 357 times in the Gospel of John, 384 times in the book of Acts, and 681 times in the remaining epistles. And therefore there are 2,556 omissions in all, just in that manuscript alone. Now both the Western and the Alexandrian manuscripts are often referred to as the critical text. And they are highly corrupted and contain an extensive amount of errors in them. And it is from these manuscripts, the Western and Alexandrian manuscripts, that the modern translations of the Bible are being made. Now, the third group, the traditional text, is also known as the Byzantine or the received text or the cosmopolitan text. And they're also referred to as the majority text because most of the manuscripts are within that group. And at times the scholars refer to them as the Textus Receptus or the received text. And it's extremely essential, friends, that all Christians be aware of the differences in these text types, because the teachings of Catholicism and paganism and pagan philosophy are found in one group, and the other contains the Word of God as given to God's people all the way through the apostolic church. Now the apostles, remember, wrote the originals and sent these out to the various churches. They were to be read in the churches. The churches then copied them and sent them to neighboring churches. And they were copied and recopied and sent from this church to that church. And that's where the various manuscripts came from. These were the ones that became known as the received text, or the Textus Receptus. And they were distributed through Syria and Egypt, or not Egypt, Syria, and up into Greece, and up into Europe, and through Italy and France, and through these various places. And this was what the King James Bible came down to us from. Now, Erasmus now, at the time of the Reformation, took these divinely preserved Greek manuscripts, which had been in the possession of God's people from the time of the apostles, all the way through the Waldenses, the Albigenses, up into the Reformation. And Erasmus took those manuscripts and put them all together in that received text. And the Textus Receptus was the Bible that was used, the Greek Bible that was used by Martin Luther and John Calvin and many of the other great reformers. And it was from that Textus Receptus that the German Bibles and French and Dutch and Italian were all put together. Now in 1535, Tyndale made his translation from these manuscripts. And then about 75 years later, the King James Bible came on the scene. And so you see, friends, the issue is not just the King James Bible versus another Bible. It is the Greek manuscripts versus other Greek manuscripts. No translation of the Bible, my friend, is any better than the manuscripts from which it is translated. If you have a Bible that is translated from corrupt manuscripts, such as this one here, this Bible will then be a corrupt Bible. If you have one that is translated from the pure text, such as this, the King James, you'll have a trustworthy Bible. Now, Tyndale made his translation. 75 years later, the King James came on the scene. Now, on the other hand, the other manuscripts, we find that there were apostates in the church, and we mentioned them before, who began to corrupt these manuscripts and the Bible and pass them along, and these became known as the critical texts, which the Sinaiticus and the Vaticanus are the best known of that group. Now, for centuries, my friends, there's been those two different groups of Bibles, and they've both been struggling for supremacy. And for over a millennium now, the battle has been over which Bible. A lot of people have not realized it. Which Bible? And it wasn't until the middle of the last century that changes began to take place within the Christian community that caused these issues to come to the forefront. And the issue now is to accept the Bible of Rome, which our forefathers vehemently opposed, or should we perhaps go with the Bible that the Reformers, the Apostles, the Waldenses, and the others kept by their side? You see, multitudes unknowingly and unquestioningly accept the faulty foundation of two men by the name of Westcott and Hort. These two men came on the scene in the last century. They did away with the received text and replaced it with their own translation of the Bible, their Greek Bible, and from that the modern translations began to come. Again, I must emphasize, no Bible is any better than the translation or than the manuscripts from which it is translated. And so it is imperative that we evaluate these two opposing text types. Application now of that third biblical test is if the critical text is the true text, the true Bible, then it would mean that God had allowed His Word to be lost and removed from His people for over 1,500 years. You see, either Catholicism or Protestantism had the true, uncorrupted Word of God. If Rome did, it means that God's people were without it from the time of Constantine all the way up until it was restored by Westcott and Hort more than 15 centuries later. In addition to this, the critical text finds very little support within the Greek manuscripts. And the two most renowned are the Sinaiticus and the Vaticanus, and those we're going to look at the next time we come together. But in other words, if 4,998 of 5,000 manuscripts are in agreement, and those two disagree, they will take those two. Remember, friends, the oldest is not necessarily synonymous with the best, because we saw that there was a change going on all the way back then at the time of Irenaeus. My friends, until next time, may God bless you.